Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AAFR Talk. Give me just 1 second. I'm sending the segment titles on over to Jeff and to Jan as we speak. And pardon me while we do a little bit of business here on air. Jeff, let's get the second and third segments today. Let's go ahead and get those tweeted out. See if I can get down to Jeff's email address. Keeps popping in the wrong Jeff. I don't know what that is, but that's what my computer has been doing here, is popping in the wrong Jeff. And there is only one Jeff Reed. He is irreplaceable, inimitable. Okay, there it's off and running. Now, if you'd like to join the program, 888-589-8840 is the number to call. 888-589-8840 is the number to call. You know, and speaking of religious liberty, this is over in the UK, but this is coming to the United States. I mentioned the Todd Starnes piece about this Bible study being shut down in Florida, Rollins College, and they said that this group, InterVarsity group, violated their non-discrimination policy because they are reserving leadership for Christians. Well, that's what Christianity is all about. I think Muslim groups ought to be able to have Muslims as their leaders. I think atheist groups on college campuses ought to be able to have atheists as their leader. A Jewish group ought to be able to reserve its leadership for Jews. I mean, to me, that's just fair and so forth. But according to Rollins College, all these other groups, they're allowed to choose the leadership of their own choosing and to choose leaders that share the values of the organization. Only the Christians are not allowed that same privilege. So that's discrimination against Christians based on their religion. And the discrimination policy of the school prohibits that. So they are violating their own non-discrimination policy by discriminating against Christians. And they just do not see the fact that they are in gross violation of their own standard, not even allowing these Bible studies inside dorms and inside dorm rooms. And I brought this up the other day. You know who the real Pharisees are today? You know who the American Taliban is? It's secular fundamentalists, because they are the ones that want to remove all mention of Jesus from the public square. That's what the Pharisees wanted to do in Jesus' day. They wanted to remove him. They wanted to remove his name. They wanted to remove any mention of him. They wanted to remove his followers from the public square. Well, that's what secular fundamentalists, that's what the ACLU wants to do. That's what the Freedom from Religion Foundation wants to do. They are the Pharisees. They're the Pharisees of today. And they're the Taliban. Taliban wants to do the same thing. Taliban wants to drive Christ and any mention of Christ and drive Christians from the public square. So who is the Taliban today? Who are the Pharisees today? Freedom from Religion Foundation, ACLU, and secular fundamentalists all across the fruited plain. And again, I said, number to call if you want to join the program, 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. Glad to talk about the Bible series that began last night on the History Channel. Talk about eschatology, prophetic events. Talk about religious liberty, things we've covered here in the first hour, 888-589-8840. And one of the things I've said repeatedly is that we cannot coexist, that the homosexual agenda and religious liberty cannot coexist. One is going to have to give, because every advance of the homosexual agenda comes at the expense of religious liberty. So if the homosexual agenda advances, religious liberty must retreat. And we see another example of that over in the UK. Here is a police chaplain, just a voluntary police chaplain. He was forced to step down because on his own Facebook page, he expressed support for a biblical view of marriage. Here's the piece from Christian Concern. A Christian police chaplain has been forced out of his position after expressing his views on the government's proposals to introduce same-sex marriage on his personal website. Reverend Brian Ross, who worked as a volunteer with Strathclyde Police, said that there was no mandate. This is what he said on his own personal page. There's no mandate for the change, that is legitimizing same-sex marriage. And he described marriage, quote, as a God-ordained institution between a man and a woman. That's all he said. He just affirmed same-sex marriage, natural marriage, a biblical view of marriage, and said there's no mandate, there's no call for same-sex marriage in the UK. There's not a word even of disapproval here of anything else. It's just an affirmation of the truth. Even though it's on his personal blog, he was told that his views violated, quote, the equality and diversity policy of the police. And you ask the question, well, where's his equality? Where's his equality in this? Where is diversity? I don't see any diversity here. Diversity would say, hey, we got plenty of room for supporters of natural marriage as well as supporters of same-sex marriage. That's what diversity is all about. And we believe in equality. You have the equal right to express your personal point of view as anybody else does. That's equality. You get to express your point of view just like supporters of same-sex marriage do. And diversity is we've got room for people that support natural marriage. But the reality is that's just a myth. There's no equality in this, and there's no diversity. It is a bland and boring and monolithic and tyrannical monoversity. There is no diversity here whatsoever. He was forced to step down. Well, let's go to the phones. Hang on while I plug myself back in. All right, got to do that about once every program. Let's go to the phones. Let's go to Jimmy, Houston, Texas. Jimmy, you're on Focal Point with Brian Fisher. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Brian?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. Hey, I just wanted to comment on the national, the History Channel present the Bible.
Yes, sir.
You know, I've watched a few of the ones that they've come over the years, and a couple of times I found myself either screaming at the TV or turning the TV off and finding something else to do because I just don't see how they can be completely accurate, with their personal views, because a lot of the times I was watching one on King David, and it was just so misrepresentative of what the Bible says, and people who don't read the Bible, they're going to look at that and say, okay, well, I've learned something about the Bible.
Right.
But it was full of so much misinformation. And if you don't study these things, and so I wouldn't put too much stock in it. And I think as time goes on, they're going to keep putting out more propaganda pieces, leaving other things out that might offend somebody, and you're going to get kind of a skewed view of the truth,
Mm-hmm.
So.
All right. Well, listen, I appreciate the call. And, that's one of the reasons I think for us to be involved in this discussion. Now, not everybody has to watch it, but if you do, and you think that there is some distortion of the biblical account in there, then post that on your Facebook page or come on the Focal Point Facebook page and post something about that so we get the dialogue going so people are going to hear what the truth is. Now, the reality is this is going to be aired. So if there's error in this series, it's going to be aired, and whoever watches the History Channel, it's one of the top 10 cable channels, a lot of people are going to watch it. They're going to believe, just like our last caller said, they're going to believe what they see on the screen. They're going to believe it's the truth. So if there's distortion there, and again, I don't have any reason to believe there's going to be a lot of that in this series. I think these people, by and large, are good-hearted people. I think their motives are sincere. I think their intentions are to faithfully represent the biblical account. Now, I think they fudged on the Sodom story, but you can understand that. I mean, I don't approve of it, but I can understand why they were just deathly afraid of the homosexual lobby in Hollywood. They got to work there. That's where they make their living, and so they don't want to tick off the wrong people. Same thing, the same reason that Tim Tebow backed out of the First Baptist Church Dallas thing. You don't want to tick off the homosexual lobby because they'll take you out. They'll take you out at the ankles. So you can kind of understand, even though I don't agree with it, I mean, you can understand why they felt pressure to kind of neutralize the biblical account on that deal. But I think overall, their intentions are going to be faithful to the text. And so I think it'd be good to watch it. And if we, affirm them where they are true to the text and then present the truth when they depart. Let's go to Doug, Wilmington, North Carolina. Doug, you're on Focal Point with Brian Fisher. What's on your mind?
Well, just what you were talking about, the Bible series, and I disagree with your last caller, and even with some of the statements you made earlier. I don't believe there's one way and one interpretation to look at Scripture, and why the program yesterday did not bother me, even with the way they portrayed the Sodom and Gomorrah story, is that there is a point of view that story, the sin in that story, is about hospitality, and it has nothing to do with homosexuality. And
I understand. Well, and Doug, I understand that. I mean, these people are wrong, but when you say that people have differences of point of view, I mean, that doesn't mean that all points of view are equally legitimate. I mean, some points of view are correct and other points of view are not correct. And I think we have an opportunity and the privilege of pointing that out.
Well, I think too. Well, yes, if we're going to argue about the law of gravity, then one point of view would be correct and one point of view would be incorrect.
Right.
But if we're going to argue about a story such as that one and say, here's how I read it and here's how I read it, I think both have merit to it and both should be part of the discussion. And as you said earlier, and I agree with this part, it's great. It's great that people are having that conversation today, and that this series is having people talk about the Bible in ways and numbers that perhaps wouldn't happen if that wasn't out there. I don't think there's one absolute correct way to read that particular story of the Bible.
Well, let me ask you this, Doug, while I got you. I'm going to have to let you go here in a second, but let me just read Genesis 19. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, it's repeated, both young and old, all the people to the last man surrounded the house, and they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them." NIV translated, that we may have sex with them. Lot went out to the men at the entrance, shut the door, and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please." Now, I'm asking you, Doug, how else do you understand that?
Because the assignment to destroy the city was sent there prior to that passage. It wasn't like that happened and, we got to destroy the city. The assignment, the angels were there to destroy the city, so the sin was not what happened there. The assignment that something has gone wrong in this.
All right, well, listen, I got to let you go, Doug. Out of time, up against the news, Focal Point, AFR Talk.